When most people hear the phrase Celtic mythology, their minds immediately conjure up a very specific, very bright image. They see emerald green hills, maybe a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, and a little man in a green suit dancing a jig. Perhaps if they've played enough video games, they might picture a generic druid with a sickle. It's a comfortable image. It's the image sold to us on cereal boxes, in Disney movies, and during St. Patrick's Day parades. But the truth is, modern pop culture has done the same thing to Celtic myths that the Twilight saga did to vampires. It sanitized them, it washed off the dirt, dressed them up in bright colors, and sold them to us as a children's fairy tale. However, the real Celtic mythology, the beliefs held by the people of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and the Isle of Man, is not a cheerful fairy tale. It is a harsh, foggy, and often terrifying world. It is a world shaped by the landscape itself, by treacherous bogs that can swallow a traveler whole, by a sea that is constantly trying to kill you, and by long, dark winters where survival was never guaranteed. In this world, the gods are not distant figures on a cloud. They are a magical race that lives right beneath your feet. The fairies aren't cute, they are alien kidnappers. And the monsters? Well, let's just say that Celtic monsters make modern horror movie villains look like they need a hug. Today, we are going to strip away the Hollywood varnish. We are going to explore the real Celtic beliefs. We will walk with the Tuatha Dé Danann. We will learn why you should never trust a crying woman. We will look into the skinless face of Scotland's worst nightmare, and we will find out why the ancient Celts were more afraid of their own children than of any wolf. Get comfortable, pour yourself something strong, and let's step into the mist. To understand this world, we first have to look at who runs it, or at least who used to run it. Unlike the Greeks with their Mount Olympus, or the Norse with Asgard, the Celtic gods didn't live in a separate realm in the sky. They lived right here, in Ireland. They were known as the Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Danu. Now imagine the most impressive entrance in history. The legends say that when they arrived in Ireland, they came on dark clouds that blocked out the sun for 3 days. Some versions say they arrived on ships and immediately burned them to ensure they could never retreat, creating a massive plume of smoke. Either way, they made it clear, we are here and we are not leaving. They were described not just as warriors, but as masters of every skill imaginable: art, poetry, medicine, and magic. They were the original Renaissance men of the Iron Age, and they brought with them 4 magical treasures from their home cities in the north, items that define the genre of fantasy to this day. The Stone of Fall, a magical stone that would literally scream out loud when the rightful High King of Ireland stood on it. It was the ancient version of a biometric security scanner. The Spear of Lugh, a weapon so bloodthirsty that it had to be kept submerged in a vat of sleeping potion or poppy juice. Otherwise, it would try to fly off and kill people on its own. The Sword of Light, Cailleach Solace, a blade from which no one could escape once it was drawn. The Dagda's Cauldron, a massive pot that could feed an entire army and never run empty. Basically, infinite logistics. But Ireland wasn't an empty Airbnb waiting for them, it was occupied by the Fomorians. If the Tuatha Dé were the gods of light, civilization, and skill, the Fomorians were the gods of the chaotic, untamed elements. They were the storm, the blight, the deep ocean. They were often depicted as monstrous, sometimes with one arm, one leg, or animal heads. The clash between these two races wasn't just a war, it was a battle for the very soul of the land. Order versus chaos. The climax of this war was the Second Battle of Mag Twyard. This is the Avengers, endgame of Irish myth. The Fomorians were led by Balor of the Evil Eye. Balor was a giant whose eyelid was so heavy it drooped over his eye. It took 4 assistants using hooks and pulleys to lift it open on the battlefield. But when that eye opened, it was a death ray. Anything he looked at died instantly or burned to ash. The champion of the Tuatha Dé was Lugh. Lugh was the ultimate multi-class character: warrior, smith, harpist, poet, sorcerer. He was actually half Fomorian himself. Baelor was his grandfather, which adds a nice layer of Star Wars family drama to the mix. Lug didn't wait for the assistants to hoist Baelor's eyelid. He used a sling to fire a tathlum, a concrete hard stone ball, straight through Baelor's eye. The force was so standing behind him. Baelor decimated his own troops. The Tuatha Dé won, and they ruled for centuries. But eventually human invaders, the Milesians, arrived. And here is the most Celtic twist of all. The gods didn't die. They didn't leave. They just went underground. They used their magic to shrink themselves and moved into the Sidhe, the ancient burial mounds and hills of Ireland. Over centuries, these majestic gods devolved in the popular imagination, transforming from tall warrior kings into the fair folk, or fairies. So, when you walk on an Irish hill, you are literally walking on the roof of a god's house. Now, before we get to the monsters, we have to talk about the people who acted as the bridge between humans and these powerful hidden gods. The Druids. Pop culture has done a terrible job with Druids. We tend to picture peaceful, bearded men in white robes who hug trees, brew herbal tea, and maybe dispense wisdom like a fantasy Yoda. The reality? The Druids were the terrifying intellectual and political elite of the Celtic world. They were judges, doctors, royal advisors, and sorcerers. They held the power of life and death. The Romans, specifically Julius Caesar, wrote extensively about them. And Caesar was scared of them. He claimed they were the glue holding Celtic resistance together. Why were they so feared? Because of the power of the geas, pronounced gesh. A geas was a magical taboo or prohibition. A druid could place a geas on a king or a hero. It might be something simple like never eat dog meat, which was the hero Cuchulain's taboo, or something incredibly complex like you cannot enter a house while the sun is setting. If you obeyed your geas, you gained power. If you broke it, even by accident, you were doomed. The universe would conspire to kill you in a tragic, ironic way. The Druids weaponized fate itself? And then, of course, there is the Wicker Man. According to Roman accounts, the Druids would construct massive effigies of men made of woven sticks, fill them with living sacrifices, criminals, prisoners of war, or sometimes innocents, and set them on fire to appease the gods. Now, modern historians debate whether this actually happened on a large scale, or if it was just Roman war propaganda to make the Celts look like savages. But the very fact that the rumor existed shows how much fear the Druids commanded. They were not hippies. They were the masters of a blood-soaked magical law. So the gods are underground and the Druids are gone. What's left? The little people. But don't let the name fool you. The Leprechaun. Let's dismantle the biggest cliche first. The Leprechaun. You know him. The cobbler with the buckle on his hat. But the original Leprechaun was likely a water spirit. In the medieval tale, The Death of Fergus, King Fergus wakes up on a beach to find himself being dragged into the ocean by 3 tiny, angry men. They weren't trying to give him gold. They were trying to abduct him. Even in later folklore, the leprechaun is not a happy-go-lucky guy. He is a solitary fairy, which is rare as most fairies live in groups. He is a miserable, grumpy old man who works as a shoemaker for other fairies. Why? Because fairies love to dance, and they wear out their shoes constantly. His gold isn't a magical gift, it's his hard-earned savings. If you catch him, he won't grant you wishes. He will use psychological warfare. He'll trick you into looking away for a split second, and poof, he's gone. The Banshee next. Video games treat her as a screaming ghost enemy, but the Banshees, woman of the fairy mounds, is a figure of pure aristocracy. She is not a random ghost. She is an ancestral spirit attached only to the old families of Ireland. Names like O'Neill, O'Connor, O'Brien. If you don't have the right DNA, you don't get a Banshee. Her cry is not meant to scare you. It is keening, a traditional rhythmic wailing performed at funerals. When a Banshee cries, she is mourning a death that hasn't happened yet. She is a spiritual alarm system. Sometimes she appears as a washing woman. The Bean Knee in Scotland. If you walk by a stream and see a woman washing blood-stained clothes, look closer. If the clothes are yours, well, don't buy any green bananas because you won't be around to eat them. If the Banshee represents the fear of death, this next creature represents a fear far worse, the fear of your own family. The Celts lived in a world of high infant mortality and mysterious childhood illnesses. When a healthy, happy baby suddenly became sickly, stopped growing, or became aggressive, they didn't have modern medicine to explain it. They had the myth of the Changeling. The belief was terrifyingly simple. The fairies covet beautiful human children. They think their own babies are ugly or weak. So they sneak into your house, steal your healthy child, and leave a changeling in the crib. The changeling could be a piece of enchanted wood, a stalk that looked like a baby but would soon die and be buried. Or more sinisterly, it could be an ancient, decrepit fairy who simply wanted to be fed and pampered by humans. Imagine the psychological horror for a parent. You look at your child, but you are convinced it's not your child, it's a monster. Folklore even gave instructions on how to prove it. One famous method was the eggshell brewing. The mother would take a dozen eggshells, fill them with water, and boil them over the fire as if making a giant stew. The changeling, overcome with curiosity, would sit up and speak in an old man's voice. "I have seen the acorn before the oak, but I have never seen anyone brew water in eggshells." Once revealed, the creature would vanish. This is the darkest part of Celtic lore because it had real-world consequences. Historically, there were cases where parents abused or even abandoned sick children, believing them to be changelings. It's a tragic example of how mythology tries to make sense of the heartbreaking randomness of disease. Now, if you thought stealing babies was bad, wait until you meet the things that just want to tear you apart. We travel north, to the Orkney Islands of Scotland. Here, the sea is cold, gray, and dangerous. And from that sea comes the Nuckelavee. I want you to picture a horse. Now picture a human torso growing directly out of the horse's back. The human head is massive and lolls from side to side. The arms are so long the knuckles drag on the ground. But here is the detail that makes the Nuckelavee unique in the world of monsters. It has no skin. The entire creature is a raw, wet anatomy lesson. You can see the yellow veins pumping black blood. You can see the red muscles contracting as it moves. The Nuckelavee is a demon of plague. Its breath wilts crops and sickens livestock. It hates the smell of burning seaweed, which was an industry in Orkney, and the smoke drives it into a killing frenzy. It has only one weakness: fresh water. It cannot cross a flowing stream. So if you are ever chased by a skinless horseman in Scotland, find a river. It's your only hope. Back in Ireland, the horror takes a different form: the Dullahan. Washington Irving Americanized him as the Headless Horseman, but the Irish original is far more metal. The Dullahan rides a black horse that snorts sparks. He carries his severed head under one arm. The head is the texture of moldy cheese, and it glows with a phosphorescent light. He uses it as a lantern. He carries a whip, but not leather. It's made from a human spine. Unlike other monsters you can fight, the Dullahan is absolute. He is the embodiment of death's arrival. He rides until he finds a specific person. He stops his horse. He lifts his severed head. The head speaks one word, the name of the person. The moment the name is spoken, the person dies. Instantly. Soul ripped out. And don't try to lock your doors. All locks open automatically for him. Is there a defense? Strangely, yes. Gold. The Dullahan is terrified of gold. A single gold coin thrown at his feet will cause him to rear back and flee. It's a bizarre, specific weakness for an unstoppable force of death. We've talked about male monsters, but we cannot ignore the supreme female power of the landscape. In many mythologies, Mother Nature is a gentle, nurturing figure. In Celtic myth, she is the Cailleach. The Cailleach is the divine hag, the queen of winter. She is depicted as a giantess with a blue face, rusted teeth, and white hair like frost. She wanders the mountains with a magical hammer. She is the creator of the landscape. The legends say she formed the mountains of Scotland and Ireland by accidentally dropping rocks from her apron as she strode across the land. She is not evil, but she is harsh. She protects the deer and the wolves. She brings the snow that freezes the ground. She is locked in an eternal struggle with Brigid, the goddess of spring. As the seasons turn, the Cailleach drinks from a magical well of youth and transforms into a young woman or turns to stone until Samhain, Halloween, comes again, and she puts on her winter cloak once more. She reminds us that nature is not a garden. It is wild, cold, and indifferent to whether you have a coat or not. Finally, we return to the water, but not for horror, for heartbreak. The Selkie is one of the most poignant creatures in all folklore. They appear as seals in the water, but on land, they can unzip their seal skin and step out as breathtakingly beautiful humans. The core tragedy of the Selkie story is almost always the same. A fisherman spies a Selkie dancing on the beach. He steals her skin. Without it, she is trapped in human form. He forces her to marry him. She is a good wife. She cooks, she cleans, she bears children. But she never smiles. She spends hours staring at the ocean, speaking to the seals that bob in the waves. Eventually, she finds her skin, often hidden in the thatch of the roof. And here is the brutal part. She doesn't hesitate. She puts the skin on and dives back into the sea, abandoning her human husband and often her half-human children forever. It is a story about the wildness of the soul. You cannot domesticate the ocean, but be careful near the water for another reason. The Kelpie, or water horse. It appears as a beautiful, tame pony standing by a loch. It looks lonely. It seems to invite you to ride it. But if you touch it, your hand sticks to its hide. You cannot pull away. The pony's skin becomes adhesive. It then drags you into the water, drowns you, and eats everything but your liver, which washes up on shore. So, rule of thumb in Celtic lands: if an animal looks too friendly, run away. We have covered a lot of ground today. We've seen gods with laser eyes, horses without skin, and kidnapping fairies. I want to ask you a question for the comments. If you had to survive a night in a haunted forest, which of these creatures would you least want to encounter? Personally, I'm voting for the Nuckelavee. The no-skin thing is just too much for me. Let me know your choice below. So what does all this tell us? Celtic mythology is not just a collection of cool monsters for Dungeons and Dragons. It is a map of how these ancient people saw the world. It was a world where boundaries were thin. The boundary between the living and the dead, between the land and the sea, between the warm hearth and the cold winter night. These stories served a purpose. The Changeling explained sudden illness. The Nuckelavee explained crop failure. The Banshee gave dignity to death. The Leprechaun warned against greed. They populated the dark corners of the map with names and faces. Because if you can name the horror if you know it has a weakness, like gold or fresh water or iron, then maybe, just maybe, you can survive it. Modern life tries to banish the shadows with electric lights and science. But standing on a misty Irish hill at twilight or looking out over a storm-tossed Scottish sea, it is very easy to feel that the old gods and the dark monsters aren't gone. They're just waiting. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the dark. If you enjoyed this deep dive, and I mean really deep dive, into Celtic lore, please hit that like button. It helps the channel more than a pot of leprechaun gold. Subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell so the Banshee doesn't have to come and warn you about missing a video. Stay safe, and keep your iron close.